After 200 hours, I have finally unlocked everything out of every Warbond in Helldivers 2. Personally, I thought I was going to get this done a little faster than 200 hours, but I've been making videos and I work full time, so I'd play as much as I can, and I ended up having a good time unlocking everything organically over time. But nevertheless, what I wanted to do in this video is I wanted to go back and take a look at all the Premium Warbonds and just kind of revisit the journey so far, because it's been a heck of a journey with a lot of different things that have come out over time here, and some things I haven't looked at in quite a while. I did decide to leave out the mobilized Helldivers Warbond only because A, it's free with the game, and B, it doesn't actually require you to make any additional purchases, but all the Premium Warbonds all share the same exact framework in terms of you buy it and you get a certain amount of content. So how I decided to rank each Warbond is I decided to break it down into 5 different categories. And those 5 categories are weapons, throwables, boosters, armor passives, and armor cosmetics. So what I'll be doing is I'll be going through each Warbond and ranking it on each one of these categories, and I'm going to be assigning it a specific number. Each one of these numbers represent 5 is an S tier, 4 is an A tier, 3 B tier, 2 is a C tier, and 1 is a D tier. And the total possible points each Warbond can obviously earn is 25 points. Now I understand that 3 of the 5 Warbonds did not actually come with a brand new armor passive, so I automatically gave those Warbonds specifically a 3, basically a B, because it's just not fair for me to hold that against them, because there was some good stuff in them, but they're going to get held back by the fact they don't have an armor passive. So at the end of each Warbond, I'll be giving you the final number, and then at the end of the video, I will be giving you the final order based on the numbers, so that way you can see exactly how I rank each Warbond based on that. Anyways, enough of the explaining, let's get into it. So starting off with the first Premium Warbond we got, it was the Steeled Veterans Warbond, and the weapons we got in this Warbond are the AR-23C Liberator Concussive, the P4 Senator, the SG-225IE Breaker Incendiary, and the JAR 5 Dominator. So looking back at all these weapons, I honestly use a lot more of these in my rotation than I thought. So the P4 Senator is actually a really fun gun to use overall. It packs a punch with its medium armor penetration. Also, the cool thing about it is that it does have the speed reloader after some updates, because when it runs dry, you can actually reload it with a speed reloader, which made this thing significantly better. And now this weapon is one of my favorites to use in the game. So the Breaker Incendiary is just god tier in this game. It was one of my favorites when I first started playing the game, but it really saw some huge benefits when they started actually buffing the gun, and now it's a big crowd favorite for everybody. The fact that it does a lot of damage, and on top of that has the fire damage over time effect, just makes it absolutely a fantastic option against the bugs. The Dominator is one of my favorite guns in the game, because not only did they give us some much needed buffs to make it much better, it's just one of my favorite weapons to use against the bots. It has a lot of good precision damage, and when it actually hits weak spots, it kills them very quickly. It also has a good stagger effect and other various things like that, and just in general, it's just very satisfying to use, and I just absolutely love this weapon. The only real outlier for weapons in this Warbond is the Liberator Concussive. They have done everything trying to buff this thing and make it more usable, but it just never really feels great to use. Now, is it not effective? No, it's actually decently effective, even though a lot of people don't like it. But it's just, I don't know, it just doesn't feel good to use, so that is really the only outlier out of all these weapons. So for the weapons for the Steel Veterans Warbond, I give them overall a 5. We do get one throwable, and that is the G10 Incendiary Grenade, and this has been one of my favorites since the beginning when I started playing this game. I absolutely love setting fire to the bugs. Now, it wasn't very strong when this Warbond first came out, but they have done a ton of work making fire damage actually super effective, and it overall became one of my favorites until the Impact one came out much later, which we'll get into in one of the other Warbonds. But overall, I would have to give this grenade a 5, because its utility against the bugs is just so great that it's definitely one of my favorites still to use against the bugs. So the one lone booster that we got in the Warbond was the Flexible Reinforcement Booster. Unfortunately, it's one of the most useless boosters in the game. Essentially what it does is it decreases the amount of time it takes for you to start gaining reinforcements back once you hit 0. So if you didn't know, once you hit 0, you actually gain back 1 reinforcement after about 2 minutes or so. What this booster does is it actually decreases that by 10%, so it drops it by about 12 seconds, so it goes from 2 minutes to 1 minute and 48 seconds, which is absolutely useless. Now if they give this thing some buffs, allow you to be able to maybe gather reinforcements throughout the whole mission, sure, it may be more useful, but right now in its current state, honestly, it's very useless in my opinion, so I'm gonna give it overall a 1. We did not get an armor passive with this Warbond, so again, like I said in the beginning of the video, I'm gonna give it a 3 just by default for fairness sake. So for the armor cosmetics, I think they're decent. I don't really run them too much, especially since we've got some much better armors over time, but again, they're decent. If you're trying to go for the immersion thing with the servo assisted, having the robot arm is cool for the immersion's sake, but I don't know, I mean, like, they're just not my thing. So overall, I would give the armor cosmetics a 3. So the total score for the Steeled Veterans Warbond is a total of 17 points. The Cutting Edge Warbond was the second Premium Warbond introduced to the game, and the weapons we received in that Warbond were the LAS-16 Sickle, the SG-8P Punisher Plasma, the LAS-7 Dagger Pistol, and the ARC-12 Blitzer. Now, once again, this Warbond has some pretty banger weapons. However, they were not always that way. If most of you remember, when this Warbond was first introduced, a lot of these weapons had some issues and we were all pretty disappointed. However, through some patches and some time with the developers making these weapons actually better, they're now some top tier choices for a lot of people, including myself. The one exception has been the LAS Sickle, which has been a crowd favorite since its inception. It has elite accuracy and fire rate paired with the ability to basically have infinite ammo, barring you manage the heat mechanic properly, that is, of course. Made this weapon an instant favorite for a lot of people, and so many people still use it to this day, and it's definitely seen basically no changes to its overall playstyle. So the Punisher Plasma has seen its fair share of balancing and buffs and some nerfs in some ways, but overall it is now one of the best crowd control weapons in the game when you're facing the bots. This thing is consistently in my rotation personally because it's just so good at crowd controlling the Devastators more specifically. Those rocket Devastators are basically nullified by this thing because you're able to keep them stun locked. And then in general, this AoE is actually decent size enough to be able to stun lock multiple enemies at once. So this weapon is just so versatile in my opinion. The Dagger Pistol is the only real stinker here because they have tried to make some buffs and changes to it, but it just has never really gotten there to being able to be a top tier choice in the secondary category. And it's not because it's not necessarily strong enough, it's just because it overheats way too quickly when compared to other laser weapons in the game. So this is what unfortunately makes this weapon mostly underused by most people because it's just not a very efficient weapon to use. So the ARC-12 Blitzer went from being this massive disappointment overall to being one of the goated weapons for crowd control against the bugs in Helldivers 2. So the weapon was already pretty strong and the knockback was already there and it had incredible range, but just the fire rate was so punishing that it was really difficult to do anything against the bugs or any type of enemy in the game. However, they did release that patch that increased the fire rate, and now this thing is just absolutely amazing when dealing with hordes and hordes of bugs because it's just shooting everywhere. It has unlimited ammo. You could just sit here and just keep shooting this thing and keep everything at bay. So overall, I would have to give the Cutting Edge Warbond weapons a solid 5. So the one throwable we got is the G23 stun grenade, and I'm just gonna give this a 5 right away because it's probably one of the most used grenades in the game. No, it doesn't do damage. No, it can't close bug holes or destroy fabricators, but the fact that it can stun chargers and hulks makes it just a god tier thing to use. And also, if you have a lot of enemies around you, you can stun them up just very easily. And if you run engineer passive, you get 6 of these things. Honestly, this grenade is just so clutch and useful. I find myself using it all the time, and it's just one of my go-to things to use in the game. So the booster we got was the Localization Confusion. Still one of the most confusing boosters in the game with some decent utility. Too much to explain in this particular section, but I'm going to keep it simple for you. Basically what this does is increase the time between reinforcement call-ins by 10 to 20%, which makes it decent for high tier content and makes things a little bit more manageable, so that way you don't always get back-to-back reinforcements called when reinforcements are called in. But I don't know, I wish that they would make it just a little simpler in the tooltip to understand, so that way we can all properly test it. So I'm gonna have to give this a 3 overall because, again, it is useful, I think, but it is still a little bit too confusing for a lot of people, including myself, to use sometimes. We did get a new armor passive with this Warbond, and it was Electrical Conduit. And this is the first new armor passive we got since launch, so honestly it was nice to see, and it's a decent passive overall. Getting 95% resistance to arc damage seems pretty significant. However, most enemies, actually no enemies in the game to this point, use arc to fight us, so really we're not taking arc damage from anything but ourselves. So if you have teammates that want to run Tesla towers like on Eradicates or something like that, this is nice to have because this will protect you from dying and being one shot from those. Also, arc throwers, when they were at its peak, this armor really protected you from those. But in general, it's so niche that it's really hard to see a lot of use for this thing, except for those rare situations where your team decides to go all arc or something. But for that reason, I'm gonna have to give it a 3 overall. It's okay, but it's not the greatest. So for the armor cosmetics, I'm just gonna flat out give it a 2. It's not my favorite in the game. It's not terrible, but they're just so boring. I mean, they didn't add enough flair like they've done with all the other Warbonds, in my opinion, and I wish there was like more electrical look to it, maybe some aura or just something, but it just is so bland and boring. And I just don't like it, in my opinion. I rarely run these armors anyway. And honestly, I don't really care to because they just don't look that great, in my opinion. So the total score for this Warbond is an 18. The third Warbond we got is Democratic Detonation, and the weapons we got are the BR-14 Adjudicator, the R-36 Eruptor, the CB-9 Exploding Crossbow, and the GP-31 Grenade Pistol. All of the weapons in this Warbond are definitely viable. A lot of them are things that I use fairly regularly, but they still need some work, in my opinion. The Adjudicator has received all sorts of buffs since its inception. I mean, it was started off as a marksman rifle, moved to the assault rifle category, has seen increases to its damage, armor penetration, just all sorts of things. Has been completely rebuilt from the ground up, in my opinion, but it still doesn't feel great to use. Its overall ammo economy still is a little bit rough. Yes, the backup magazines are fine, but again, it feels like you're chewing through ammo when you're using this thing. But overall, it is significantly better than its inception at launch. The biggest disappointment for me is the R-36 Eruptor because it had the biggest rise. It was by far the most unique weapon to come out in Helldivers 2 to this point, and it was a huge crowd favorite. It was one of my favorite weapons in the game. I could not stop using this thing because of its destructibility, the fact it could destroy objectives. It was just such a fun and unique weapon added to the game. But then there was some issues with the shrapnel effect that it had, so they took that away. And they've been trying to fix it ever since by just giving it massive damage buffs, but it's never felt the same, and I can't quite explain why. Doesn't matter how many damage buffs they've given it, because now it's up to its second damage buff increase, and it still doesn't feel like it did when it first came out. So hopefully one day it gets back to its prominence, but I don't know, right now it just sits on the shelf mostly unused by me. So the Exploding Crossbow was not the best thing in the world when it first came out. However, it is significantly improved through some various buffs and things they've done to it over time. One of my favorite things to do with this weapon now is to take it on blitz missions, because the fact that it can close bug holes and destroy fabricators makes this thing one of the best things in the world when trying to knock these missions out quickly, because the sheer amount of ammo you have to be able to take these objectives out is just huge. But it's not still the greatest weapon to use against enemies, which makes me still wish that this thing was a secondary weapon over being a primary weapon. It just doesn't really fit as a primary weapon. So if they ever decide to move it to the secondary category, this is going to be by far the best weapon in the game to be using as a secondary, just because of its overall utility for that reason. But again, I don't think they're going to do that. So it's okay in its current state, and it has its use cases, but yeah, it's not my favorite weapon overall to run outside of just blitz missions. By far the best thing to come out of this Warbond was the grenade pistol, just because it is a secondary that has a ton of utility. Now, admittedly, I did not enjoy using this at first because I felt like it was way too inconsistent with trying to destroy the bug holes of fabricators, but now over time that I've gotten used to it, it just has become such a clutch thing for me to use in so many of my builds, so that way I don't always have to run an actual grenade. I can run a stun grenade or something like that, which has been amazing because I can just use my grenade pistol to close out objectives. So yeah, this has been by far one of my favorite additions to the game because of its overall utility. My overall score for these weapons is a solid 4. The one throwable we got was the G123 Thermite Grenade, and I love this grenade in theory. It is actually a really cool grenade. It looks cool when it's being used. It's this big light show. It burns at this insanely hot heat, and the idea around it is that it can burn through armor. However, the description is a little misleading because yes, it can burn through armor eventually, but it's going to take a lot of grenades to do this, because for whatever reason it's not working as fully intended, even with the buff to fire damage, and I'm not quite sure if this thing is even supposed to be a fire damage grenade. I like it, it looks cool, and I would be awesome if it just primarily just focused on, okay, I want to burn the armor off this charger, correct? So I just throw it and then it burns its armor off and exposing its weak spot. Then I can finish it off, cool. But I've thrown as many as 4 grenades on a charger leg and it still has not burned through its armor. Again, not quite sure what to do here to make it work, but I'm gonna have to give it a 2 for now until they make some adjustments to it, because it's just not one of my favorites and it sees very little use in my rotation. The booster we got is Expert Extraction Pilot. This is a decent booster. This reduces call-in time for extract by 15% or so, and it's great if you have the complex stratagem modifier on a map, so that way extract doesn't feel so punishing, because this will increase your extract by quite a bit. But overall, it's not something I really miss when we don't run it, and not something I'm gonna be mad if somebody's running it. So it's okay. I give it a 3 overall. Sadly, no armor passive introduced with this Warbond, so again, giving it a 3 by default. As for armor cosmetics, I really do enjoy the armors from this Warbond a lot. I really only primarily use the heavy armor the most because it has fortified and it's actually a really useful armor in the game. But again, I just love the look of these. At least they look very unique. So I'm going to give them a 4 overall. So the final total score for the Democratic Detonations Warbond is a 16. So the 4th Warbond we got was Polar Patriots, and the weapons we received are the AR-61 Tenderizer, the SMG-72 Pummeler, the Plaz-101 Purifier, and the P-113 Verdict. So overall, a mixed bag here. The Tenderizer specifically has received its share of buffs. I mean, this thing has been dramatically buffed from its damage to its capacity to all sorts of different things. It's been buffed quite a bit. However, the light armor penetration for some reason just is not very good for this weapon. Now, it is a bit more of a laser than it was when it first came out, so it does have some overall utility, but it just is not very efficient at what it does, in my opinion, which is very frustrating. The 7.2 Pummeler came out so strong. It was one of my favorite weapons to be introduced into the game because of its overall capability to stagger a lot of enemies, and the fact you could use it with the ballistic shield made it just even more fun. However, it got hit with the nerf hammer, just like a lot of things, and it's still viable in a lot of ways, but it's just not as great as it was as staggering enemies, which is one of the things I really enjoyed about it. But overall, it is still a ton of fun to use with the shield against the bots, in my opinion. The 101 Purifier is still a weird weapon. I don't quite understand what it wants to be. Now, I know a lot of people are going to sit here and say skill issue or something like that, especially people who really enjoy using this weapon. But for me, I don't know, I don't like it. It feels like it's supposed to be a Gauss rifle from Fallout New Vegas or Fallout 3 or something like that, like a sniper rifle type role. But it just doesn't functionally work that way because the scope is much more short range in its nature. And just in general, I don't like the charge mechanic of this weapon. It makes it feel like it's neutering itself for some reason. So I don't know what the fix is for this weapon. It's just weird. It doesn't fit very well. It doesn't feel good to use overall, in my opinion. So it's by far one of the worst weapons we've gotten so far in any Warbond. So the 113 Verdict pistol is fine. It's not super flashy. It's just fine. I mean, the light armor pen is something that holds it back a little bit, but it's very similar to the starter pistol. And honestly, the starter pistol, because of its larger magazine, feels better to use overall. I don't know, it's cool, it looks cool. I thought it was going to be more of a Desert Eagle type role, similar to the P4 is going to kind of be in that medium armor pen range. But yeah, it's just fine. It's just not something I use very often. So overall, for the Polar Patriots weapons, I give them a 3. The throwable we got is one of my favorite throwables in the game, which is the G13 Incendiary Impact, which is an instant 5. This already took one of my favorite grenades in the game, which was the regular incendiary grenade, and just made it an impact, which made it significantly better. This thing is amazing at just being able to eliminate so many enemies very quickly because you don't have to deal with timing it or lining it up like you did with the incendiary. You just throw this thing at the enemies and they immediately catch on fire. It's absolutely fantastic. So yes, I'm going to say it again, it is a 5. It is one of the best grenades in the game. So the booster we got is called Motivational Shocks, and on paper this thing actually sounds pretty amazing because basically you get a 25% reduction to slowed effects received from attacks. So this counts for stalkers, for bile titan acid. It doesn't count toward things like EMS strikes or even those annoying flowers that are on some planets. So it's just really only from attacks. So taking stalkers at their face value, it basically takes their slow from 3 seconds to about 2.5 seconds roughly. Now, it seems pretty good on paper, like I said, but in a 1v1 situation, it's fine. I mean, against maybe bile titan acid, you're gonna die quickly, but when you start getting hit by multiple stalkers at once, like if you're getting hit by a few of them, it's just gonna keep reapplying the slow, so it really doesn't work as well as I would like. So it's okay. I would give it overall about a 3, but it's just not my favorite booster to be running in the game. Unfortunately, no armor passive again, so it's getting a 3 by default. So for the armor cosmetics, I didn't really buy the whole snow theme of this Warbond. It would have been cool if the armors with the cleats on them actually gave you some overall utility when you were on snow planets. That would have been cool. The scout armor actually looks pretty awesome in my opinion, and it's nice to have a decent looking scout armor. But again, it's okay. I like the stormtrooper look sort of, but it's just okay. So I'm gonna give it a 3 overall. So in total for the Polar Patriots Warbond, I give it a 17. Up next is the Viper Commandos Warbond, and the weapons we received are the A23A Liberator Carbine and the AG22 Bushwhacker. Sadly, we only got 2 weapons with this Warbond, but they're both not bad, and aesthetically they look amazing. Starting off with the Liberator Carbine, again, it looks amazing. I love the camo feel of it, and honestly, it feels and sounds beastly. It's really a really awesome sounding weapon. The increased fire rate really feels nice also, but the low magazine is where it really holds this weapon back. The fact that it has the same magazine capacity as the base Liberator, which has a slower fire rate, makes this weapon not nearly as ammo efficient as the base Liberator, which is frustrating. This weapon needs at least 60 rounds per clip, in my opinion, to be more viable, and then I think it will be in a better place. But overall, I really enjoy the generalities around this weapon, the sound, the feel, the look. It just overall is a cool weapon to use in my opinion. So the Bushwhacker is a solid secondary. It's nice having a little one-handed shotgun to be able to use in the game. Again, since it's one-handed weapon, it can be used with other things that you can run with one-handed weapons like the shields or any objectives. You can use this shotgun as a sidearm. So I enjoy that capability. And also the fact that it can be able to shoot 1 shot or all 3 shots makes this very strong. And just in general, it's a nice replacement for the Redeemer if you don't really want to use that, because it is great for cleaning up a lot of light armored units in the game and can do a lot of damage to medium armored units if you hit their weak spot. So overall, this is a fun little weapon to add to the game and gives you some options to not have to use the P19 Redeemer all the time. So in their current state, I'm gonna have to give the Viper Commandos Warbond's weapons an overall 3. The one throwable we got is the K2 throwing knife, and this thing is very hit or miss for me because it's definitely not strong enough in my opinion, but then at the same time it is strong because it can 4-shot a charger leg. So it's weird because it does have medium armor penetration, so it can do damage against a lot of medium armored units, but again, it doesn't kill them very efficiently. It usually takes quite a few throwing knives to kill them. You do get 8 of these, but it just doesn't feel like enough even with that. And the biggest thing is that it takes away your biggest utility slot, which is your grenade. So this thing does not offer any extra utility that a grenade would, so I don't know, it just doesn't feel like it has a very good place right now in Helldivers 2, and it needs to gain some significant strength to be able to justify giving up the grenade slot, so I'm gonna have to give it a 3 for now. So the booster we got for this Warbond was the experimental booster. This is one of the best boosters we've got in the game, if not the best booster we got in the game. It's hard to not want to run this because what it does is it takes your already existing stim, it basically gives you steroids. So when you stim now, your movement speed is increased by 15% and you get a 10% damage reduction. This thing will seriously make you feel superhuman for a short time. Now, you can run through quite a bit of damage in scenarios where you wouldn't normally survive, or survive scenarios you wouldn't normally survive. And when you pair it with the medkit booster, this just makes it really good in my opinion because it extends the amount of heal over time you're getting. So that's just very nice. I don't know, this booster has just been a godsend and I absolutely love it. So it's an immediate 5 for me. So the armor passive we got is called Peak Physique, and this was recently fixed, thank goodness, because the increase to your melee damage by 50% was working as intended. However, the increase to your ergonomics with your weapons was not. It was pretty frustrating because it didn't feel like it was making much of a difference. But now your weapons feel amazing with this thing, especially your heavier weapons like your heavy machine gun, your autocannon, the spear. Any of those weapons feel extremely good and very snappy with this armor passive on. So now, since it actually is working as intended, I have to give this armor passive an overall 4. So for the armor cosmetics, I'm gonna give it an immediate 5. I absolutely love the jungle vibe. I love the sleeveless design on all the armors. I just love the uniqueness of all these armors. Put on top of that the beret and just the overall predator vibe we're getting from this armor set. I just love it. It's just absolutely one of my favorite armors to come out so far in Helldivers 2. So in total, I give Viper Commandos a solid 20. So coming in at number 1 is Viper Commandos. Number 2 is going to be Cutting Edged. Tied for third is going to be Polar Patriots and Steeled Veterans. And coming in last is going to be Democratic Detonation. So there you have it. There's my final ranking for all the Warbonds in Helldivers 2. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments below and give me your overall rankings for the Warbonds so far that we got in Helldivers 2. Anyways, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.